I wanted to ask, because many of the left-wing, or shall we say more sophisticated proponents of a yes vote have claimed not to be nationalists, because they've said they want to have powers to help people in Scotland. And this is really a question for the more left-wing members of the panel. How can you possibly have a case for solidarity at the point at which you'd probably be leaving a rest of the UK with a very likely Tory government that would abolish the Human Rights Act, as is its current position under Theresa May, that may well leave the ECHR, etc. How can that possibly be seen to be standing with the people who stood next to us and fought against Thatcher in the mining pits, in Wales, in Scotland?
Well, it's a very good point. As I'm the most left-wing person here, let me deal with it. Sorry if that offends MD, but I think it's probably objectively true. The reason that I am in the no camp is partly because I don't believe Scots to the lifeboats and leave the other 60 million to the Tories is a morally defendable position. And secondly, the argument that I'm for yes, but I'm not a nationalist is a distinction without a difference. Because Alex Salmond will write the Constitution. Alex Salmond will be the Prime Minister doing the negotiating. And the history of all such similar breakaways is that the people who lead the breakaway go on to govern for a very long time. And the idea that in those circumstances, that with 60 million people in England at Westminster ruled by the Tories, that other than a race to the bottom could begin, is just simply foolish. If Salmond says profit tax will be 3% below the rest of the United Kingdom, the right-wing government in London will cut profit tax by 4%, Salmond then by 5%, the Tories in London by 6%, and so on. Before long, we'll be paying the companies to come here. And the right-wing government in London will create a Thatcherite economic environment with low regulation, low taxation, low levels of public expenditure. Do you know any capitalists that would prefer to locate in a country with high taxes, high regulation, high levels of public expenditure, when just across the border they could have its very opposite? I never met a capitalist like that. I'll tell you what, even Monaco Jim, even Rupert Murdoch, even, what's the other one, the Bible-belting, homophobic, bigot billionaire, Brian Suter, he'll be relocating across the border. Okay, who did I say was second? The gentleman in the tie.
What I basically want to know is how the relations between yes voters, no voters going to be fostered after the results going to come out, because with such a strong division in Scottish society, how's that going to be repaired? I mean, right now, if you look outside, there's, yes, people waiting for us to come out, and I just see that as extremely antagonistic. The same could be said otherwise. Basically, how will Scottish society recover from this?
Brian.
I think the answer to that is with some difficulty. And I think that is a very strong reason to vote no on Thursday. Because I'll tell you what happens next, is because actually the stuff that we're saying from this platform tonight has the virtue of being true. And people have been led to the top of the hill and are going to find that what they've been promised bears no relationship to what emerges. And on September 19th, jobs would start going. There would be economic chaos. You would find, you know, the implications are beyond comprehension. So you're going to have two very disappointed sets of people. You're going to have those, if this happened, which I don't think it will, and I don't dearly hope and pray it won't, but you're going to have these people who have obviously voted no, and they would have lost. But there would be a very large proportion of people who'd voted yes on this totally bogus prospectus, and they very quickly would be very disappointed. But what the yes people would be looking for would be scapegoats, because they could not afford to accept that it was their own error that had led them into this catastrophe. It would be someone else's fault. And that is what and you can see the ground being laid for this by the sort of Bampot wing of the nationalist movement outside the BBC yesterday. You know, that's, and you can see it outside here now, because what they are lining up is scapegoats. It won't be their fault. It won't be, you know, it will be external forces who have done this. There will be a conspiracy. I mean, it is an awful scenario, frankly, but it would be a much, much worse scenario if there was a yes vote, because instead of having one disappointed side, you'd have two disappointed sides, because those who thought they had won a victory would have in fact been lied to in order to achieve that victory. And they are the ones, it's not the, and I want to go back just very briefly, George, just to the gentleman's question down here, why are people on the left voting for it? It is beyond my comprehension why people who call themselves of the left are voting for what we are seeing happening now in Scotland. But it won't be the, you know, the kind of dilettantes of Byers Road who pay for this with their jobs. It will be working people in the public service and in the private sector who will pay with their jobs, and their families will pay with their security. That is what is at stake here, and it is a total mess. How in heaven's name we get into it, I don't know, but the only conceivable way out of it is to vote no on Thursday.
Go on, sir.
I'm an undecided voter, and social inequality is a major thing for me. And I'm wondering if most people who are dissatisfied with inequality right now in the UK is what's driving most people to vote for yes. What would the UK therefore use to vote to help this inequality in the UK right now, to sort of help this, what's causing this situation right now for the yes voters?
Look, I have taken part I take a different view from some of the members of the panel, I think, on the issue of what this debate has done to Scotland. A referendum which has only two options, yes and no, is necessarily polarising. There's no getting away from that. It is necessarily polarising. But by and large, this has not been an unpleasantly divisive debate. And I don't think we should be distracted. I don't think we should be distracted by a few nutters on either side. That's what they are. The majority of yes people are not nutters. The majority of yes people are our fellow citizens. And many of them are my friends. And they will continue to be my fellow citizens, and they will continue to be my friends after we have won this referendum. Can Scotland heal from this process? Of course we can, come on. Of course we can heal from this process, so long as we don't allow the small number of nutters, interrupters, the rabble, to destroy Scottish social fabric. And I see no evidence on either side of the debate of anybody serious wanting that to happen. Now, on inequality, I've taken part in many town hall meetings, many of which have been a lot more rowdy than this very civilized exchange that we've had this evening. One of my opponents in several of these debates has been a wonderful man called Robin McAlpine, and I disagree with absolutely everything Robin has ever said about policy. But I like Robin very much. My problem with debating Robin is that we don't debate the same question. The question that I'm interested in pursuing, and the question which we will all be voting on Thursday, is should Scotland be an independent country? The question is not should Scotland be a socialist country. The question is not should Scotland be a place where poverty is cured overnight and where inequality disappears. But Robin, and many others like him, don't want to debate the question of independence. They want to debate the question of public policy. They want to debate poverty, and they want to debate inequality. Now, I think poverty and inequality are the bread and butter, the nuts and bolts of ordinary daily politics. It's not what I do. I'm a constitutional lawyer, and I'm interested in constitutional questions, but that puts me very much in a minority of freaks. But the problem with Robin's position is that there is never any connection made between the substantive policy goals that he wants to see achieved, and eradication of poverty and inequality, and independence. And, you know, if you could show me how an independent Scotland would be a richer place, if you could show me how an independent Scotland would be a place where there is far less inequality, then I might not be so passionately against it. But the facts are, as Professor MacDonald and I have sought to explain to you, that if we vote yes, I don't really think we will, but if we vote yes, inequality will become worse in Scotland, and child poverty will become worse in Scotland, because we will have more austerity than anything we have known. Which is why I say, don't let them pull the wool over your eyes. This is not about socialism or poverty or inequality. It's about what state do you want to live in. And I want to live in a big state that plays a big part in a big, difficult and dangerous world. That's why I want Scotland leading the United Kingdom and not leaving the United Kingdom.
The woman at the front.
Talking about inequality, I'd like to point out that I have a disability that amount of people in Scotland have, and I have, according to Scottish rules, absolutely not one single right of independence or access to anything in Scotland. And for 3 years, I've been petitioning this government to include me and make adjustments. In England and in Northern Ireland, they're making adjustments now. The current Scottish government will not listen. Therefore, I say to you, if they can do this now, if they're not listening to people now, why are they going to listen later? And
well said.
I say no.
Well said.
I say no.
Thank you. Gentleman here.
Given that there are approximately 30,000 UK civil servants done by, a report done by the Scottish Government, and taking the Department of Work and Pensions as an example, it says in this report that they do all the work that's required for benefits and pensions for the population of Scotland. And then another 40% of the time is spent on English matters. How many civil service jobs are going to go when the nationalists attempt to take over? I'm not actually joining this. I work for a financial company down the road, but I'm feeling for my fellow Scots who are going to be made redundant, surely.
Okay. Somebody in the middle. Anyone in the middle? Yes, gentleman there.
Thank you. Could I just make a point for the lady at the front about disability? The current Scottish Government, the SNP government, entered into a concordat with COSLA, which they got in exchange for freezing council tax and making councils have to work far harder. One of the results of that was that disability budgets which councils administer have been draconianly cut across Scotland. And if there's any people still undecided, think about what we're doing to our disabled people in the country, where in this city we sit in just now, disabled budgets have been cut in many cases by up to 50%. I challenged Alex Salmond to his face about that. He told me a pack of lies in his response and eventually conceded that he had told me lies. That is the First Minister that we have, ladies and gentlemen. And for the woman at the front of the audience, my sympathies go out to her because she is a real victim of a government that does not care about our disabled people.
Brian and then Danny.
Well, sorry, yes, I should have deferred to Danny. Yeah, I think it's such a strong point. Just to the lady at the front specifically on the NHS, you know, that I think the most horrible lies that have been told in this whole campaign have been about the NHS and threats to the NHS. But part of that has been to suggest that there is no synergy between, you know, we are a separate Scottish National Health Service. Well, largely we are, but we also benefit from being part of something bigger. My dear friend Sam Galbraith was kept alive for 25 years by the Freeman Hospital in Newcastle. There are all there are all sorts of specialisms, there's training, there's whole areas where we benefit from part of a larger NHS. But just the related point about council budgets, the most, and I'm still waiting, and I don't expect any of the shouters to give me an answer. I'm still waiting for this one redistributionist policy of the SNP. But the most regressive policy of all is the freeze on council tax, because it benefits many people not at all at the bottom of the economic scale, and the people by definition who gain most are the wealthiest people in Scotland. But it's not the wealthiest people who pay for it in cuts and services, it's the people at the bottom of the economic scale. So it's just, when the Tories did it, it was called rate capping. When the Nationalists do it, it's supposed to be some virtuous social policy. There is nothing redistribution is going on, and there are victims. And once we get this over, hopefully, we'll get back to talking about these issues and put the finger on the fact that they're looking after the better off, and all we do about the poor is talk about them and use them, but not act about them.
Right, yeah. Danny.
In answer to the first question, the answer is many thousands of jobs. As you've heard from all of us on the panel, but from Ronald and myself particularly, I think the biggest economic issue in this debate is the damage that will be done to our economy, and therefore the damage that will be done to the resources that we'd have in Scotland to pay for our public services. It would be pain after pain after pain after pain, simply to balance the books. Tax rises, spending cuts, in order to make sure that we can cover the basic costs. And that inevitably would affect the jobs of thousands of people in the public sector. But I wanted to go to the point made by the second questioner, because you referred to the Concordat with COSLA, and I think this goes to another pretty fundamental problem that we have seen with the SNP government over the last 7 years. And that is that they talk about the devolution of power, but what they practice is the centralization of power. Yeah. Power after power after power has been taken. Now, I don't know how you feel about this here in Glasgow, but I look at it from the perspective of an MP representing a constituency in the Highlands, and I look at the fact that our police service has been centralised. And so our local control over the Northern Constabulary has been taken away, and as a consequence, we now have armed police officers walking the streets. We now have mounted police officers in Inverness, something we'd never seen in centuries before that. Well, probably 2.5 centuries in fairness, but a very long time at any rate. We've seen our fire service centralised. We've seen the Economic Development Agency in the Highlands centralised, having its power taken away from us. And I think in the end, what we need in Scotland is not independence. We need a new settlement for Scotland, which takes power, extra power to Edinburgh, yes, but takes a lot of power from Edinburgh and gives it back to the people and the communities of Scotland. Wow. And by the way, that is precisely what Gordon Matheson, the leader of the council in this city, and I did a few weeks ago when we signed a city deal for Glasgow. It's about giving power and resources and control over its economy back to this great city.
Bob Gillespie was a gallant trade union leader standing up to Rupert Murdoch. Welcome, Bobby.
Thank you. Is it on? Are we on?
Aye, you're on.
I would like to ask the constitutional lawyer, since I haven't had the pleasure of hearing him before, a question. Since it's a well-established fact from all the people involved in politics that the leadership of the SNP are very centralised, it's a very disciplined party, and I think a very dangerous party, but their lying is monumental.
Yeah.
And in this issue, it affects every single person in the country. So it's important. The one thing that we haven't heard about is his claims about the EEC, about the common market. Now, you being a constitutional lawyer, without paying you or paying a lawyer to stop you speaking, even although you haven't made any report, I'll now ask you if you can enlighten the audience.
The question from the front row actually contained two questions, and I'll try and answer them both, given that I'm not a politician. The first question was about the state of the SNP. Now, that's not my problem, or at least it wouldn't be my problem if they weren't my government. And they were, by the way, a government I didn't vote for. But that doesn't give me the right to be independent. But when I was invited, I'll tell you a little war story. When I was invited a few months ago to give evidence to one of the committees in the Scottish Parliament on the distinction between institutions and assets and liabilities that I talked with you about earlier this evening, I was trying to explain what the legal position was. And of course, as you may have understood, the legal position is not congenial to the SNP worldview, in which they are right and everyone else is immaterial. And so I was interrupted by a member of the Scottish Parliament who represents the SNP. And because I was interrupted, my microphone was switched off by the convener of that committee, who was also a member of the Scottish Parliament who represents the SNP. This was caught on camera. Most things that happen in the Scottish Parliament are caught on camera. And the result of this is that I was invited down to the House of Commons to finish my evidence, and that was also filmed, and you can watch all of this on YouTube. So when Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon talk about a new written constitution for an independent Scotland, the first thing I want to see in the Constitution of Scotland, whether it's independent or not, is effective parliamentary accountability for a government for a government which has no respect at all for the rule of law, which is the most important of all constitutional values. And how do I say that? I say that because we know that the First Minister has lied to us about having taken legal advice on EU membership. For years, the SNP's position was that an independent Scotland would automatically become a member state of the European Union. Mr. Salmond spent at least £20,000 of your money on legal fees, they didn't come to me, on legal fees, trying to keep secret the fact that this legal advice did not, in fact, exist. Now, if that happened in the House of Commons, the Minister would be expected to tender his resignation to the Prime Minister. But what happens in Scotland is that when people have the temerity to ask Alex Salmond a question, we have protests outside Pacific Quay at the BBC asking for that journalist's resignation. Is that the Scotland you want to live in? Because it's not the Scotland I want to live in.
Thank you very much.
The truth about the European Union is that there is no way that an independent Scotland could be a full member state of the European Union by the time of Independence Day, if Independence Day were indeed to happen in March 2016. It couldn't happen. It's impossible for it to happen in that time. So we would start our life as a new state in international law outside the EU. Now that might please UKIP, it might please some Conservatives, perhaps it might actually please half the SNP, you know, the fundamentalist half of the SNP, but it wouldn't please Scottish farmers who would lose millions of CAP benefits. It wouldn't please Scottish consumers who would see prices going up. It wouldn't please international students who would find it much harder to be here. It would be another element of the economically ruinous and catastrophic plans that the SNP have put in front of us.
Thank you. Brian.
I know it's nearly time for Vijani to throw us out, so two very quick points on the NHS. I mean, the first one just on TTIP. I mean, this is one of these things that now people go around and say, well, TTIP is awful. I mean, hardly 1% of the population know what TTIP is, you know, but it's now become some sort of mantra of wickedness, which, as Adam has said, you know, does not stand up to examination. But actually, Salmond was in New York in April. He always goes for Tartan Week, which nobody notices in New York, but gets a lot of publicity at home. And he actually said, when he was doing the big shot stuff in New York, what a wonderful thing TTIP was, and quotes, "It is particularly good for Scotland." You know, so all of this is a kind of recent invention that there's some mysterious new law appeared out of the land which is going to privatise the National Health Service. It's absolutely nonsensical. But the only other statistic I want to quote is there were two surveys recently, one the Scottish Government's own survey and the other the British Social Attitudes Survey. And they both asked about satisfaction levels with the National Health Service. But the satisfaction level with the National Health Service in the UK as a whole is 60%, and the satisfaction level with the National Health Service in Scotland is 61%. Would it not be better if instead of spreading scare stories about the National Health Service and the rest of the UK, that the Scottish Government, with all the funds and levers and powers at its disposal, was to do something to address the problem that 40% of people after 7 years of SNP government are dissatisfied with our National Health Service?
Well, well, there you have it. If there's a yes vote on Thursday, we'll be out of not just one union, but two unions. The European Union, which has at least 5 and maybe more governments within it, every one of whom has a veto and faces separatist challenges within their own state, and who could use that veto or not. I just ask you this. Why would the Belgian government, a country that takes 35 minutes to drive across, but which faces the threat of being cut in two, why would it vote in the European Union to reward separatism? The Spanish government, which faces not one but 2 separatist movements, why would they vote for automatic right for a secessionist state to join the EU when that could only encourage secessionism within its own country? In Italy, a similar phenomenon of the northern leagues who say we could be much richer if we could only get rid of the southern part of Italy. Why would the Italian government vote for Scottish membership of the EU when that could only encourage the tendency to break apart their own state? Not only the northern leagues, but the city, one city of Venice, recently had a referendum and passed a resolution demanding independence for Venice. There is no end to this destructiveness, no end to this division, and we can play a significant part in keeping countries together on Thursday rather than accelerating their breaking apart. Because people tweet at me all the time, you're in favour of freedom for other countries, but not for Scotland. Scotland is already free. It could have voted for separation. It could have voted for separation at any time in the last 80 years of universal suffrage and did not do so. But if it did so on Thursday, it would be free and would also need its collective head examined. The truth is that breaking up countries is never a good idea unless there is an overwhelming reason of national oppression. There's no case for partition, and there's no case for the partitioning of this small English-speaking island either. Breaking up is hard to do. Divorce is never easy, never pleasant, especially for the kids. And it's the kids of Scotland I'm concerned about here. I've been divorced more than once, actually. And I tell you, it's horrendously expensive, extremely bitter, and you spend many an hour lamenting on the fact that you hadn't worked on your relationship rather than broken it all up. On Thursday, just say no. Just say no to separation and divorce. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And safe journey home. Well done. Excellent. Excellent. Well done, Professor. Well done, Danny.